Thank you, Cameron Tonkinwise, for spending time with me and members of the permaculture community who are interested in your work.
Thank you. It's an honor. It's a privilege to be able to speak to you. So thank you.
What would you like people who are at the grassroots level, what would you like them to know about you?
I am a design studies scholar, which is a very academic way of saying I have the great privilege of teaching people. I've been teaching people for over 30 years, and that my focus is primarily on design, which is understood mostly as the art and science of creating mass-produced goods, which is definitely part of the problem, but that the understanding of the way in which people and things relate, which is required to do that designing, is a very particular skill and, as I say, art form that we now need to transition to more sustainable ways of being on the planet. And in particular, speaking to people very familiar with permaculture, not to think there is a direct analogy between being able to shepherd natural beings into some kind of productive relation with each other and how we go about building the artificial world, but definitely to indicate that there are things that can be learned that require translating from the so-called natural to the artificial. And that if we begin to approach design of the environments in which we live, we humans live most of the time, that if one begins to design those in such a way that you adopt the same kinds of principles as permaculture, you begin to create very different humans, very different built environments, and very different built environment and natural environment relations. So even though I spend all my time teaching designers to make artificial things, to make technological products, to make life worlds that exist within those kind of, I would almost say, bubbles, I think my primary purpose over the last 30 years has been to make sure that that is not approached in terms of mass production efficiency and convenience, but instead thought about in a very relational way.
I wondered whether one of the setbacks in permaculture is that we're asking the individual, the user, to design their space.
It's an interesting provocation. Obviously, the history of design outside of design is normally thought of as strong-willed individuals working alone to come up with magical forms that then are mass-produced and imposed upon the population, often through some kind of persuasive marketing, etc. But in fact, most of the objects that we rely on and depend upon in everyday life are the product of what's called anonymous design. A lot of it is silent design by people who are not designers. And the designers who do work and work well, work in the ways that I consider best and try to teach toward, are always working collaboratively. And that collaboration is not only with other designers and others on the supply side, trying to convince other people to make available certain materials and techniques that would allow them to make something. So that's a kind of collaboration. And not even a collaboration with the users, which of course has been a long time coming revolution in design for designers to actually start being user-centered and then occasionally human-centered, as if that's novel. I don't know what they were doing beforehand. It's kind of hideous to think. But definitely design now is a much more collaborative activity with the people who will, and it's a terrible way to put it, but I think it goes to the responsibility of a designer, who will suffer what it is that somebody else designs. So there's a lot of emphasis on what is called co-design these days, and making sure that the people who will have the lived experience of working with this thing, this environment, this communication, this platform that is created, have had input into it. So it's a very collaborative process in that way. But finally, and this is the bit where I would say, even if versions of the permaculture community might, as you say, have a possibly too individualistic approach to designing a small garden, let's say. Even so, designers are also all the time collaborating with materials. If you're an academic, it's fashionable these days to call it the more than human or other than human or non-human actors, but what we're basically talking about is that materials, the materials that the designer is trying to coax into particular forms, to hold in particular forms so that those forms can be relied upon to enable us to kind of live. That is also a type of collaboration. And designers are not just design thinkers coming up with ideas on a piece of paper or in a computer and then just sending it off to somewhere to be manufactured. Designers are always still craftspeople who spend a lot of time coming to understand different types of materials. And scientific ways of being in the world tell us that the materials are neutral and inert and dead. But in fact, any craftsperson knows that every material is still always alive in that way. And again, this is what I mean by this analogy between permaculture and design. So even if you are alone making a garden, you're not alone in that you are trying to coax and curate or choreograph many different species, many different alive and inert, so-called inert systems to come into dynamic relation and unfold over changing conditions of weather and season, etc. And this is not dissimilar to what a designer is trying to do in that way. It's definitely the case that because design operates at scale, it forces thinking about collaboration beyond the scale that your question seemed to suggest. And I do think it is interesting, as somebody who only has partial interaction with permaculture, but has done a lot of work, for example, on thinking about shade trees as ways of beginning to respond to coming climate in urban environments. That, you know, if you're going to coax a tree into maturity so that it can begin to provide some assistance with how we're going to live on a heating planet, you cannot do that alone. It's not just between you and the tree, it's also between you and the tree and the neighbors, what they're doing, you know, the kind of flow of water across their property, breezes, shading, being able to convince them to tolerate leaf drop if it's deciduous, or all these kinds of things. So, you know, even when you garden in that kind of way, it is necessarily social interaction and collaborative. So in that way, I kind of think co-design has, and the processes of collaborating upstream and downstream, supply side and with users, and then with the materials themselves, all of that is what I mean by saying there should be this interesting interaction between permaculture and design.
Brilliant. Thank you. So one of our mantras is to observe, observe, observe. And it's through that observation that we form the good communications with the nonverbal collaborators, such as the landscape itself and the organisms that we are co-designing with. And of course, then sometimes if we use machines, then we're entering the brutal design world that is forcing the landscape and the plants to be mechanized or to respond to machinery. Yeah, it's brilliant. Thank you. There's so much in that.
The kind of person who becomes a designer is the kind of person who likes to solve problems. They like to be creative. And sometimes people criticize that. So I don't mind that. I quite like that we have some people out there who are happy to take on other people's problems. But one of the consequences is that the mentality is often, oh, good, I've done that. I've done a project, I've fixed that. That's it, done. What's next? Give me another problem. Here's another problem. I'm going to spend some time. Okay, done, fixed. I made a solution. It's in the market. People are using it. That's it. They don't. There's a academic thinker, Donna Haraway, who wrote a book recently with this quite nice title, "Staying with the Trouble." Designers do not like to stay with the trouble. They do not like to suffer the consequences of their design. They do not like to, as you say, observe, not just before they make a move, but after they make a move, and watch what happens as that thing is out there in the world. They don't tend to stay with a project. They tend to kind of have what I call serial monogamy. They kind of do a project and then that one, now do another one, do another one. I think one of the things that designers need to learn is to recognize that the designing doesn't stop once they've managed to come to a solution that a bunch of people have agreed to manufacture and sell, and then a bunch of other people have agreed to use. You need to kind of stay with it. There was an interesting article just the other day saying, you know, we need to stop thinking about tree planting as a solution to climate change. We need to think about like tree maturing. It's no good sticking 1 million trees in the ground if half of them die. You want to get 1 million trees beyond sapling. Like that should be the KPI for all these groups. And I think it's the same thing with a designer. A designer needs to not think, oh, I managed to sell this product, but to say 5, 10 years after people using this product, I'm still learning from them about what this thing could be, and I'm continuing to develop it. Now, this is in fact the way digital designers have to think. So digital designers, you know, make something and literally watch users watching it in real time, using it in real time, and can make updates, as we all, you know, hate. You wake up one morning and an app is a completely different configuration because some designer is staying with the trouble. But product designers don't do that. Fashion designers don't do that. Even architects, spatial designers don't tend to do that. Very few architects, other than wanting to preserve their design exactly as is, are prepared to come back and help it modify and learn, as Stuart Brand once said in his book, How Buildings Learn. They don't sort of stay with theirs. So I think this idea that if you are doing permaculture, you are observing in order to see processes unfold over time, to work out how you can then design with that flow. That is something that designers really need to learn. That then goes, that then goes to the one point I was sort of keen to make, which is most people think of design as having a frustratingly short time frame. That it tends to be, what is the problem? Rush to market, problem done, and then don't think about the disposal of that product in 1 year or 10 years. And it's very rare for anybody to explicitly design anything deliberately to last more than a decade. I once used to run a project called Decade Sign, and it was like, you know, how do you design something to make sure it lasts a decade? And you can't just do that by ruggedizing it and making it into a great big military thing, because nobody's going to use it. You know, if I told you to make a coffee cup that's going to be used every single day for 10 years at least, possibly 100 years, you can't just make it this great big military beast that you could drop and it would still be. It has to be beautiful to use. That's how you get people to use it. That means you have to design something that people are going to care for and hold. So as I always used to say to people, the solution to this problem is in fact bone china, something incredibly delicate, the complete opposite, something that really requires a whole system of care. But then you might need to design ways of washing it up so it doesn't get smashed in the sink or something like that. Anyway, all of that is just to say designers aren't very good at thinking longer term. And most of what I do these days is think about the concept of transition design. And transition design is the attempt to say, how do you design at systems change scale? How do you, as a designer of human scale products, communications, platforms, you know, spaces, those human scale, how do you design at that human scale so that it has system change, culture change, but also change over time? So it's not just one thing does the change. It's that I need to design this and this and this, and then they begin to connect up, and over time, the culture shifts, which again, I would understand in my lay perspective to be very much the kind of slow evolving of one inherited, let's say, toxic ecosystem into something that could be more the basis of permaculture. It's a series of interventions. It's not like you can just go in one summer and there it's all fixed from now on. It's perma. So instead, it has to be constant. And so I spend a lot of time trying to teach designers now to do that multi-intervention over decades, to think about long-term change, even though their focus is on human scale products, communications, environments, etc.
So my little group of designers who are, well, we've got two issues with transition design. One was we've done a lot of navel gazing. Should we put the term transition with the term design, because that instantly kind of restricts the potential of a design? But now I realize when you use the word transition, you're talking about continually transitioning, which is brilliant. It's not like saying, oh, I want to transition to this. Oh, I'm there now.
Yep.
But continually responding to all the changes in climate and people. So brilliant. The team will love that. The other issue that we've been wrangling with is the concept that it seems to be that a lot of designers say we have a problem we're trying to solve. But in permaculture, where's the problem? I mean, there's a multitude of problems. I thought, after doing it for 30 years, some hit and miss stuff, I thought I'm not actually designing for a problem. I'm trying to create a habitat in which we can harmonize so that all our actions contribute to a positive intervention in the landscape and in the community, but to a truly sustainable culture that the future generations would be more comfortable, put it that way.
Yeah, I mean, this tension between sustainability as a permanent state and a sort of more meta understanding that sustainability is a set of relations that will be dynamic in their manifestation at everyday level, that they are permanent at a kind of meta level, but the actual experience is of continuing change. The other way to put it, which I'm fond of, is to say sustainability is more about something being able to change so that all the entities in that system have some autonomy about the direction of change, rather than this idea that we are suffering change and that we either respond or die, which is the kind of, neoliberal idea right now. You just have to go with the markets. You can't predict the future. Just be flexible, be adaptable. You just have to suffer change. Change is inevitable. These kind of slogans that you hear in workplaces. Whereas I think it's not that sustainability wants no change. It just wants versions of change that suggest I can participate, make some decision, contribute to. It's a collective decision-making, or I have some autonomy with regard to how the change happens. And sustainability is the meta framework that allows that ongoing change, rather than kind of being just slammed by some catastrophic change, which will destroy the ecosystem or a whole species or life on a planet, for example. So I think, there are different ways of understanding that version of sustainability and that tension with kind of permanence in that way. I think a lot of what we try to do in transition design is about trying to empower people to have a vision for the future, trying to make it, again, fashionable, or at least tolerable, to think you're allowed to fantasize that things could be better. And you're allowed to, as long as you can convince other people, actually, it would be better if we lived that way. It's possible to design directionally toward that, because that's exactly what we're told you can't do right now. Like, you can't predict the future. Who knows? Could be fantastic, could be terrible. Just hang in there. So nobody's kind of doing this kind of imagining anymore. If they do, they also don't tend to have great resources for doing it. We have quite a crowded a space of ideas. They all just look like dystopian films, or Black Mirror on television, or or they tend to just look like some little agrarian fantasy from 19th century Europe. And so we just don't have good ways of imagining what John Thackeray once called social fictions rather than science fictions. So we do want people to kind of recover the capacity to imagine and dream and identify the preferable. And then to get back to what you were saying about sort of problem-based designing, it is true that it is, I think, much more interesting to imagine that we could design something not because it's problematic now, but because we just imagine it could be preferable. We just imagine that there are other things that could be more desirable. And that if you have that attractor, that kind of future attractor that you're trying to get towards, it's continuous change. It's not going to be a one-off solution that's going to get us there. It's not a one-off transition. And as you work with people collaboratively on that vision and how to kind of get towards it, the vision itself might modify as you go. It becomes sort of, it changes over time. You don't have a fixed thing that you're trying to get to. The one short point I'd make, though, is that when I was defending before problem-based designing, it definitely has that danger of kind of fix mentality, the two meanings of the word fix in English, which is a kind of repair, a mistake, I'm going to fix it, and then fix as in I'm going to glue it in place and it's never going to move again. So there definitely is that danger with problem-basedness, that it has a kind of fix mindset, not the fixed mindset, but a fix mindset. However, I tend to think the other way, which is right now it feels like so much of our world is not able to be changed. It's a giant system just grinding on, and the only thing I could possibly control is the small, allotment I have somewhere, like that's it. Whereas I try to teach designers that every problem that you might see somewhere, it's not just something that needs fixing, it's an opportunity for system change. That the way to solve the problem is not just to come up with a design to jam in that particular problem and then we're in the same system now, just continuing along with all these band-aids fixing it. But instead it's an opportunity to say, well, the only way to solve that particular problem is not by sticking a widget in that hole, but by changing the nature of the system so that it can begin to look and work differently. So as a result, I'm always trying to, transition design is always trying to teach designers never to only to solve the problem at hand, but to solve the problem at hand in a way that also continues system change, seeds system change, connects to something somebody else is doing somewhere else, creates a platform that could enable change to begin. So every problem is also an opportunity for getting out of business as usual and finding something different. So again, to kind of analogize just off the top of my head in ways that I don't know enough to do, so it's a bit dangerous, but I can imagine that, if you are observing a particular, I'm just looking down the side of my house now, which is filled with growing trees that I'm desperately trying to shade my house with, that if I suddenly see the arrival of a particular pest into this place, that are threatening my trees that I'm so wed to, as they're all sort of adolescent at the moment, not quite shade trees. If a pest arrives, it's a problem. But it's also an opportunity to begin to understand, well, something must have changed. Like something's changed in the soil, something's changed in the tree, something's changed in the climate. So, I have to obviously manage the pest in order to promote the growth of the trees, which I'm trying to get to. But it's an opportunity to do it in a way that might actually change the whole system. I need to think about the things that are planted at the base of the tree. I need to think about the nature of the soil, etc. And it's the same thing, that problem-solving design can always be an opportunity for creating transitions. And designers just have to learn to be observant, which is really hard. They have to be system observers. And instead of just seeing a problem and thinking, oh, great, I've got something to do for the next 6 months, let's go solve that thing. They're thinking, okay, I'm solving that. but I'm also mindful of this other polycrisis.
Well, thank you very much for everything you've given me today. There's heaps to go on. It was a joy to interview you. Thank you, Cameron.
That's fine. It was lovely. Thanks.